I was standing by the kitchen door that afternoon, holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold when I heard her voice through the half-open crack. She was laughing, light and careless, telling someone on the phone she'll never notice the missing money. Just a few transfers, she won't catch it. For a moment, I thought I had misheard, but the second laugh was sharper, cruel in the way only someone confident in their deceit can sound. My hands didn't shake, and I didn't make a sound. I just listened, every word sliding into my heart like a spleeonter. They thought I was old, slow, harmless. They forgot that quiet doesn't mean blind. I turned off the stove, set my cup down, and smiled to myself. People often mistake stillness for weakness, but sometimes it's the silence before a storm they'll never see coming. Thank you so much for watching, my dear. I'd really love to know where you're watching from, so please tell me in the comments below. It warms my heart to see how far stories like mine can travel, and remind me that even across miles, understanding connects us all. My name is Janet, and I live here in Maryland, in a small quiet town where mornings start with the hum of old trees and the sound of birds that never seem to tire of singing. I've lived in this house for more than 40 years, through every season of joy and sorrow, laughter and loss, and I've learned that a home is not built only with bricks or wood, but with the moments we survive inside it. When my husband passed years ago, I promised myself I'd fill these walls with peace, not anger, and that no matter what life brought my way, I'd handle it with grace. Life, though, has a way of testing the promises we make to ourselves. I had raised my son to be kind, to work hard, and to always remember his roots. And when he married, I hoped his wife would become the daughter I never had. In the beginning, it almost felt that way. She called me Mom, she asked for recipes, she helped me plant flowers in the yard, and sometimes when she laughed, I believed we were truly becoming a family stitched together by care. But over time, small changes appeared. Tiny cracks that only someone who has lived long enough to notice quiet details could see. The way she handled my things without asking, the way she sighed when I repeated myself, the way she smiled too quickly whenever money or bills were mentioned. I wanted to believe those were just habits, not signs, because believing in good keeps the heart soft, and I had spent too many years fighting to keep mine that way. I suppose I still carried that old faith the day I opened my home to them after they lost theirs. It felt like the right thing to do, and I was proud to be able to help. The house felt alive again with noise, and dinners were full of conversation instead of silence. They said they'd stay only until they found their footing, and I believed them. I didn't mind covering the groceries or paying for small repairs. I told myself family is meant to share, to give without keeping score. But time has a way of peeling away illusions one layer at a time. You start to notice things, a tone, a look, a missing receipt, and soon enough, the truth sits beside you at the table, waiting to be acknowledged. I often sat by my window in the evenings watching the streetlights come on, thinking about how love can sometimes blind us to disrespect. I thought about how easily generosity turns into expectation when people forget the effort behind it. But even then I wasn't angry. I just felt a quiet ache, the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that teaches you patience. I never imagined that the person I had trusted in my home would treat that trust like something disposable. I never thought I'd have to defend myself not from strangers, but from those who shared my dinner table. Still, that's the thing about life. It doesn't ask for permission before showing you who people really are. I remember that season clearly. The air carried a certain stillness that made every small sound echo through the house. Even the closing of a drawer or the faint clinking of coins in a purse felt louder than it should have. I was still trying to convince myself that everything was fine, that what I heard through that kitchen door was just a misunderstanding, but deep down, I already knew better. I had seen enough in life to recognize deceit wearing a friendly smile. My son had been busy with work, long hours, and longer worries, and I didn't want to burden him with what I was sensing. So, I kept my silence, the kind that lets you listen more than you speak. There were days when I'd sit at the table sorting through the mail, and a new receipt would catch my eye, one I didn't remember signing for. A small purchase that didn't seem worth questioning. But small things have a way of adding up. I'd see new shoes by the door, a perfume bottle on her dresser, or a box delivered with my name but never opened in front of me. When I'd ask gently, she'd smile and say, "Oh, that's just a mix-up, Mom. I used your card by mistake, but I'll sort it out." Her words were smooth, her tone rehearsed, and her eyes never quite met mine. I'd nod and let it go, because sometimes letting people think you don't know is the best way to learn how deep their deceit runs. Still, it hurt, not the money, but the idea that she thought so little of me, that she saw me as someone too fragile to notice, too old to understand. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, remembering the woman I once was, the one who managed a household, balanced every bill, and knew every penny's worth. I hadn't forgotten how to survive. I had simply grown quiet in a world that confuses silence for weakness. And so, while they slept, I started writing down everything. Dates, amounts, places. I kept a small notebook tucked away in my dresser, not out of anger, but out of habit. The same habit that helped me raise a family on a nurse's paycheck and keep a roof over our heads. There's something powerful about patience. It's not the absence of emotion, it's control of it. I learned that the hard way after my husband passed, when grief wanted to break me, but discipline kept me steady. That same discipline guided my hands each time I recorded another missing amount. I'd sip my tea, listen to the ticking of the clock, and tell myself, not yet. Because rushing truth never ends well. You have to let people walk far enough into their own trap before they realize they built it themselves. And so, I waited. I went about my days as if nothing had changed. I smiled when she spoke, I thanked her when she offered to help with my finances, and I even laughed at her jokes. I played the part she believed I was, harmless, forgetful, grateful. All the while my heart grew stronger, not bitter but steady, knowing that sooner or later, every lie finds its daylight. It was a Friday morning when the truth stopped hiding, and I remember the sky was still pale, the kind of light that makes everything look softer than it really is. I had gone to the kitchen early, the house still quiet, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the sound of birds outside. I was rinsing a cup when I heard footsteps, and then her voice again, low but clear, coming from the next room. She was talking on speakerphone, her cousin's voice faint in the background, and then those words came again, the same ones that started it all. "She'll never notice the missing money, I tell you, she can barely log into her account." The laughter that followed felt colder this time, sharper, like a knife wrapped in silk. I stood there, my hands wet, heart steady, listening as she bragged about me, about how she managed to make transfers from my account without me even realizing it. Every word she spoke carved something into me. Not anger, not yet, just a deep sadness that someone I had welcomed into my home could think so little of respect. When she finally hung up, I stayed in the kitchen for a long while, looking at the sunlight slowly stretching across the floor. That moment could have broken me if I had let it, but something inside me shifted instead. I thought about all the times I had helped her, the clothes I bought, the meals I cooked, the nights I stayed up waiting for them to get home safely. I thought about the kindness I gave freely, not because I had to, but because I believed in family. That belief had been my anchor through every storm, and now I realized it had also made me vulnerable. But as much as it hurt, that realization also lit a fire in me, a quiet determination I hadn't felt in years. I didn't confront her right away. I just cleaned the kitchen, wiped the counters, and went about my morning. I said good morning to her when she finally came downstairs, her hair still damp from a shower, pretending nothing had happened. She smiled, offered me coffee, and talked about some sale she saw online, completely unaware that I had already seen her reflection for what it truly was. I smiled back, calm, gentle, the same way I used to with patients who didn't know their diagnosis yet. There's power in patience, and I wasn't going to waste mine on shouting. I would wait for the right moment, one that would teach her a lesson far louder than any words ever could. Later that evening, when they both went out, I sat alone in the living room, my notebook on my lap, and I flipped through the pages where I had written every suspicious transaction. The total wasn't small, but it wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about boundaries, respect, and trust that should never have been toyed with. I thought about my son and how he probably didn't even know what she was doing. That thought made the ache in my chest heavier. I knew that when the time came, I would need to show him, not tell him, because truth always has a stronger voice when it's printed in ink. That night, before going to bed, I looked in the mirror and studied the face staring back at me. Lines of time, yes, but also lines of strength. I whispered to myself, they think I'm old, but old doesn't mean weak. I turned off the light, knowing that the next time I walked into that bank, I wouldn't be the quiet woman they underestimated. I would be the woman who remembered everything and who knew exactly how to reclaim what was hers. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, the house still wrapped in that early silence that always feels like truth before the day begins its noise. I sat at the edge of my bed for a moment, letting the light from the window touch my face, and I thought about everything I had learned in 70 years of living. Life has a way of humbling you, of teaching you lessons you didn't ask for but needed to grow. I had faced loss, sickness, loneliness, and yet none of those things hurt quite like being betrayed under your own roof. Still, I wasn't broken. I was simply ready. I took a long shower, fixed my hair, and wore the same blue coat I had owned for years, the one my husband used to say made me look stronger than the weather. That memory made me smile, because that was exactly how I felt, stronger than the storm that was about to come. When I walked into the kitchen, she was already there, humming to herself, making coffee as if nothing in the world had changed. I greeted her softly, my voice calm, measured. She turned, smiled, and asked if I wanted breakfast. I told her I had errands to run and wouldn't be long. She nodded, completely unaware that those errands were the start of something she'd never see coming. My purse felt heavier that morning, not with money, but with resolve. As I stepped outside, the cold air filled my lungs and cleared my thoughts. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused, the way I used to be when I had to make tough decisions for patience. Steady hands, clear mind, calm heart. The bank was only a few blocks away, the same one I'd been visiting since before my son was born. The same tellers still worked there. The same man still greeted me at the door. "Good morning, Mrs. Janet," he said with that warm familiarity that comes from years of trust. I smiled back and replied, "Good morning, dear. I need to take care of a few things." Inside, I sat with Mr. Lewis, my advisor, a kind man who had helped me manage my accounts for decades. I told him I wanted to review some recent transactions. He clicked through the screen, and as the numbers appeared, my suspicions became facts. The transfers were right there, every one of them, carefully labeled, disguised as payments for bills and maintenance. I nodded slowly, my heart steady as I asked him to print everything. I told him I wanted every password reset, every joint access removed, and every card replaced. He looked at me with a quiet respect and said, "Mrs. Janet, would you like me to freeze the secondary user's access immediately?" I took a deep breath and said, "Yes, please do that." When I signed the final paper, a calm washed over me, the kind that comes when you finally take back control of something you should have never lost. Before I left, Mr. Lewis said, "You're doing the right thing," and I smiled gently, replying, "I know, I just should have done it sooner." On the walk back home, I felt lighter, as if the cold wind had taken something heavy from my shoulders. I thought about how people forget that trust is a kind of currency, more valuable than money, and once it's stolen, it's hard to earn back. I thought about how she would learn that soon enough, not through anger, but through consequence. When I reached the house, I saw her car still parked in the driveway, and through the window, she was on her phone again, laughing. I paused for a moment, looking at her, and whispered to myself, "Laugh now, my dear, because by tonight, the laughter will be gone." Then I walked inside quietly, sat down at the dining table, and poured myself a cup of tea. I didn't need to confront her, not yet. The truth was already working on my behalf, and before the day ended, she would understand that underestimating me was the most expensive mistake she ever made. By evening, the house felt different, not because anything had changed on the surface, but because I knew something they didn't. I moved through the rooms quietly, setting the table for dinner, the same way I always did. Only this time every sound felt heavier with meaning. The clinking of plates, the soft scrape of a chair, even the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, all of it seemed to echo the truth that was about to unfold. When they came home, I could tell from the way she smiled that she believed her little game was still safe, that I was still the trusting woman who asked no questions. She didn't know that the world she built out of my generosity had already started to crumble the moment I left the bank. Dinner passed like any other night, small talk, laughter that didn't reach the eyes, and me sitting there listening, letting them speak, without knowing what I knew. When my son mentioned how he might need to transfer some funds for the month's bills, she cut him off too quickly, saying, "I already handled it." That was my confirmation that she hadn't yet realized the account was frozen. I hid a small smile behind my cup of tea and said, "That's good, dear. I trust you've got it all under control." The words tasted different that night, calm but edged with truth. After the dishes were cleared, I went to my room and sat by the window, looking out at the fading light. The sun was setting slow and golden, and I remember thinking how peace feels so much stronger when you earn it. I wasn't anxious about what was coming. I was patient. Letting people face the mirror of their own choices doesn't need anger. It just needs time. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and whispered a quiet prayer for strength, not for revenge, but for clarity. Somewhere deep down, I believed that by tomorrow, the lesson would write itself, and there'd be no need for me to raise my voice. The next morning, the sound of hurried footsteps woke me before the sun had fully risen. At first, I stayed still, listening. There was a kind of panic in her voice that told me the storm had finally arrived. From my room, I heard the shuffle of drawers, the rustle of papers, and the faint click of her phone screen lighting up again and again. Then came the sharp edge of her words. "It's not going through. Why isn't it going through?" I smiled quietly to myself and took my time getting dressed, smoothing the sleeves of my cardigan before stepping into the hallway. When I walked into the kitchen, she was pacing, her phone clutched tightly, eyes darting from the screen to me. She tried to force a smile, saying, "There's something strange happening with the bank. Maybe it's a system error." I poured myself a cup of tea, calm as ever, and replied, "Oh, I'm sure it'll sort itself out. Banks are very careful with money these days." She didn't answer, only bit her lip and tried again. A few moments later, my son came down the stairs holding his phone, looking puzzled. "Mom, did you change something with the account? My card isn't working." His voice carried a confusion that almost made me feel sorry for him, almost. I looked at him gently and said, "No, dear, I didn't change a thing. You might want to ask your wife about that." The silence that followed was heavy, like air before thunder. She froze, pretending to scroll through her phone as if she could still undo what had already been done. They both left the room quickly, whispering to each other in low, frantic tones. I sat by the table, stirring my tea slowly, feeling the warmth of it spread through my hands. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was peace, the kind that comes when truth finally walks into the room uninvited. From the living room, I heard her voice trembling, saying something about calling the bank, and then a faint gasp when she realized the accounts were no longer linked to her name. I could almost picture her face as she saw the access denied message. I didn't move, didn't interfere. I wanted them to have their moment of realization without interruption. Sometimes silence teaches more than any lecture ever could. They had laughed behind closed doors, believing I was too old to understand, but now they were learning that age doesn't erase wisdom, it refines it. I took another sip of tea and whispered to myself, "Now you see, my dear, now you see what happens when you mistake kindness for blindness." Not long after, I heard the sound of the front door closing harder than usual, followed by their hurried voices outside. I stayed seated, calm, letting the minutes pass like steady waves. Eventually they came back in together, faces tight, eyes restless. My son was the first to speak, holding his phone out like proof of some injustice. "Mom, all the accounts are locked. The bank says access has been changed. Did something happen?" I looked up at him slowly, meeting his confused eyes with quiet steadiness. "Something did happen," I said, my tone gentle but firm, "and it's about time it did." His wife stood beside him, pretending to be shocked, clutching her chest as if the world had betrayed her. She started to speak, her voice trembling with false worry. "There must be a mistake, maybe a hacker or a system error. We should call the bank right now." I nodded, resting my hands together on the table. You can call them if you like, I replied softly, but I imagine they'll tell you the same thing they told me yesterday. The color drained from her face then, the mask slipping faster than she could hold it up. My son looked between us, realizations starting to rise behind his eyes. I slid a small envelope across the table, its weight more than paper could ever hold. These are the records, I said. Every transfer, every date, every amount that left my account without my knowledge. I thought you both might want to see where it all went. He hesitated before opening it, and as his eyes moved across the pages, his breath grew heavier. Sandra, what is this? He asked, his voice low but sharp. She stammered, searching for words. I meant to pay it back. It wasn't, but I stopped her with a calm wave of my hand. No need to explain, I said quietly. The paper already did that for you. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the clock ticking above the mantel. I could see the truth settling between them, heavy and undeniable. My son sank into the chair opposite me, still staring at the list of transactions, while she stood frozen, her eyes darting anywhere but mine. I leaned forward just slightly and said, You thought I wouldn't notice, but you forget. I built this life by paying attention to the smallest things. You can't take that away from me. She tried to speak again, her voice cracking, but I didn't let anger guide me. Instead, I said softly, I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here to remind you that trust isn't a gift you take for granted. Once it's broken, it doesn't return the same. Then I stood up slowly, the chair creaking behind me, and looked at them both. You'll be fine, I said. You just won't be fine on my account anymore. With that, I walked toward the hallway, my steps steady, leaving them in the silence they had created for themselves. As I reached my room, I could hear her begin to cry quietly, and my son whispering her name, but I didn't turn back. I had done enough speaking for one day. Some truths don't need to be repeated, they just need to be felt. After they left the room, I stayed still for a while, just listening to the quiet settle back into the house. The kind of quiet that feels different, not peaceful yet, but honest. I could hear their footsteps moving upstairs, then the creak of the floorboards as they argued in low voices. My heart didn't race, it just beat steady, like it had already accepted what it needed to. I walked to the window and looked out at the yard, the one my husband and I planted years ago, the same one where our son used to play. The world outside looked the same, but everything inside had changed. Trust is invisible until it's broken, and once it's gone, you start seeing everything with new eyes. After a while, I heard my son come down again. His face looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from realizing too late that something you loved has been spoiled by carelessness. He sat across from me, the same seat where he had eaten breakfast every morning as a boy, and for a moment, I saw a shadow of that child in him, the one who used to promise me he'd always protect me when I got old. He looked at me and said softly, Mom, I didn't know. I nodded, letting the silence stretch a little before answering. I believe you, I said. But you didn't want to know either. Sometimes ignoring what's in front of you feels easier than facing what's real. He lowered his eyes, his fingers rubbing the edge of the paper still on the table, and I could feel his shame fill the room like heavy air. I told him I didn't hate her, that hate only makes wounds last longer. But I also told him I couldn't live under the same roof with deceit anymore. She may have taken my money, I said, but she can't take my peace unless I let her. He nodded slowly, the truth too heavy to argue with. When he went upstairs again, I sat back and closed my eyes. There were no tears left, only clarity. Betrayal doesn't end you, it simply rearranges what you value. I thought of how easily trust can fade when respect disappears, and I promised myself I would never confuse the two again. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. One that didn't hide lies, only lessons. And as I drifted off, I realized that peace isn't something others can give you. It's something you take back the moment you stop waiting for them to change. The next few days passed slowly, but not in sorrow, in reflection. The house felt lighter, almost as if it could breathe again. And so could I. I started my mornings with a quiet cup of coffee by the window, watching the sunlight spill over the garden. It reminded me that life, no matter how bruised it gets, always finds a way to shine again. I cleaned out the guest room they had been using, folded the blankets neatly, and opened the windows wide. Fresh air swept through, carrying out everything that didn't belong anymore. The silence that once felt heavy now sounded like peace. I realized that forgiveness doesn't mean letting people back in. Sometimes it just means letting the pain go so it doesn't live rent-free in your heart anymore. My son called once or twice, his voice softer, weighed down by guilt. He asked if I was all right, if I needed anything. I told him the truth. I was fine. Truly fine. I didn't want pity or apologies. I wanted understanding. I told him I hoped he would find his own peace, that he would learn what happens when respect is taken for granted. He didn't have much to say, only a quiet, "I love you, Mom," before hanging up. And even though I knew he still had a long way to go, that simple line meant more to me than anything money could buy. One evening, I sat out on the porch with a warm blanket over my knees and looked up at the sky. The same stars I used to point out to my husband when we were young were still there, steady and silent. It made me smile, thinking how, even after storms, the sky doesn't change, it just clears. That's how I felt inside, clear. I had learned that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is close a door and leave it closed. You can love people from a distance and still wish them well, but you don't have to keep opening the same wound to prove it. I began doing small things for myself again, tending to my flowers, cooking the meals I loved, taking slow walks around the neighborhood. People waved, asked how I was doing, and I'd smile and say, "Better than before." Because I was. Peace isn't loud, it's quiet, steady, and earned. And in that quiet, I found myself again, the woman who survived, who learned, and who refused to let betrayal take her softness away. A week later, life had settled into something calm, quiet, and beautifully simple. The air in the house no longer felt heavy, and every room carried a new kind of stillness. The peaceful kind, not the painful one that lingers after betrayal. I woke up each day with purpose again, not because everything was perfect, but because I had finally taken back what peace was mine to begin with. I made breakfast just for myself. Scrambled eggs and toast the way I liked it, not the way anyone else preferred. I opened the curtains wide, letting sunlight fill the corners that had once felt dark with tension. There was freedom in those small things, in choosing for myself again, in living without walking on eggshells inside my own home. One afternoon, I received a letter from the bank confirming that all my accounts were secure and that the trust I set up was now active. I ran my hand over the paper slowly, feeling its texture, and smiled. It wasn't the numbers that comforted me, it was the control. It reminded me that I was still capable, still sharp, still the same woman who once worked double shifts to make sure her family never lacked anything. No one could ever take that part of me again. I put the letter away neatly, not as a reminder of loss, but as proof of strength. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with orange light, I sat outside with a cup of tea and thought about everything that had happened. There was no anger left in me, only understanding. Sometimes betrayal is a strange kind of gift. It forces you to see where you stop protecting yourself and shows you how to begin again. I thought about my son, about how hard it must be for him to face the truth, and I whispered a prayer for him to find his way. As for her, I didn't wish her harm. Just wisdom, the kind that only arrives after everything you've built on lies comes crashing down. That night before going to bed, I looked around my room and felt grateful. Grateful for the lessons, for the calm that replaced the noise, and for the quiet certainty that I was no longer afraid of being alone. Peace, I realized, doesn't always come from fixing what broke. It comes from walking away and choosing yourself. And that choice, once made, changes everything. A few weeks passed, and one afternoon there was a knock on the door, soft and hesitant, the kind that carries guilt instead of confidence. I opened it, and there she was, standing there with her head slightly bowed, eyes swollen from tears. For a moment, I just looked at her, not with anger, but with the kind of quiet that comes from already knowing how the story ends. She asked if she could come in, and I stepped aside. The house smelled of fresh coffee and lavender, and for a second, I wondered if that familiar scent made her remember the home she had almost destroyed. She sat across from me at the same table where the truth had once been laid bare. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "I came to say I'm sorry," she whispered. I know what I did can't be undone. I listened, every word careful, fragile, and full of regret. I could see she wasn't the same woman who had mocked me weeks ago. Life had already begun teaching her in its own way. I didn't rush to respond. I took a slow sip of my coffee and looked at her with calm eyes. "Sandra," I said gently, "what you took from me wasn't just money, it was trust. And that's something no apology can buy back overnight." She nodded, tears sliding down her face. I told her I forgave her, not for her sake, but for mine. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and waiting for someone else to get sick. "But forgiveness," I added softly, "doesn't mean returning to the same place. It means I wish you peace, just not under my roof." There was a long silence after that, and then she nodded again, standing up slowly, her voice breaking as she thanked me for listening. When she left, I closed the door quietly and stood there for a moment, feeling the stillness wrap around me like a warm blanket. Forgiveness didn't change the past, but it changed me. It reminded me that strength isn't measured by how loud you fight, but by how calmly you let go. I walked to the window and watched her car disappear down the street, and instead of bitterness, I felt light. Life has a way of circling back to clarity, of giving you exactly what you need to finally exhale. As the sun began to set, painting the walls in soft gold, I realized that some endings don't need applause. They just need peace, and I finally had mine. That evening, I sat alone in the living room with only the soft ticking of the clock and the faint glow of the lamp beside me. The air felt still, peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I thought about everything that had happened, every word spoken, every tear shed, and I realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes life has to break your heart just to remind you who it still beats for. I had spent so many years giving, forgiving, and hoping. And now, for the first time, I was simply being. No pretending, no waiting for people to change, just me here, steady in my truth. I looked around at the house that had seen every version of me, from young wife to tired widow, from trusting mother to a woman who finally understood that protecting your peace doesn't make you unkind, it makes you wise. I reached for the small photo of my husband on the table, smiled, and whispered, "I think you'd be proud of me." Because I knew he would be. I had handled the storm the way he always said I would, with grace. And as the night settled deeper, I felt a quiet gratitude in my heart, not for what I lost, but for what I found within myself. Peace isn't loud, and justice doesn't always come from shouting. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through truth, through patience, through time. Thank you, my dear, for staying with me till the very end of my story. I hope it touched your heart in some way, and maybe reminded you that no matter what others take from you, they can never take your strength. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and share your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. And please, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. Until next time, take care of yourself, and guard your peace. Because it's the most precious thing you'll ever own.